Six unknown actors walked onto a cheap Saban production in 1993, got paid next to nothing, and accidentally became the most famous teenagers on the planet. 33 years later, one became a paramedic and then stood in a federal courtroom. One directs films in Canada. One survived something on that set so awful, he walked out mid-season and didn't speak about it for over a decade. And two of them aren't here anymore. This is what actually happened to all six original Power Rangers. And I promise you, the real stories are stranger than anything the show ever wrote. Oh, and we're doing something a bit mad right now. 30 videos in 30 days, chasing 2,500 subscribers. If you want in on that ride, we genuinely love your support. Right. The Red Ranger first, because his story might be the wildest one of the lot. Austin St. John was 17 when he put on the red suit. 17. He was the leader of the most popular kids show on Earth, and almost nobody knew he was earning barely above minimum wage to do it. That's not an exaggeration. The original cast weren't union actors. No residuals, no royalties, nothing. Every lunchbox, every action figure, every pair of Red Ranger pajamas sold millions, and the guy whose face sold them saw basically none of it. So in 1994, at the height of the show's fame, Austin did something almost unthinkable. He walked. Him, Walter Jones, and Thuy Trang asked for fair pay and proper contracts, and when the answer was no, they were gone. The show wrote them out with old footage and some very dodgy dubbed-in voice lines. If you ever wondered why Jason suddenly sounded off in those later episodes, that's why. He wasn't there. And what did the Red Ranger do next? He became a paramedic. Genuinely. While kids around the world were still playing with his action figure, Austin was working real emergencies. He came back to the franchise a few times. Zeo fans know him as the Gold Ranger, but for years his day job was saving actual lives. Then, it all went somewhere nobody saw coming. In 2022, Austin was charged alongside 17 other people in a scheme that pulled in about $3.5 million in fraudulent COVID relief loans. His share was over $400,000 in loans he wasn't entitled to. The original Red Ranger, facing federal fraud charges. He pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit wire fraud. He was facing up to 20 years. The sentence came down in 2024. 5 years of probation and over $225,000 to pay back. No prison. The judge let the leader of the Power Rangers walk out the door. Why he did it in the first place? I don't know. He's never fully explained it publicly, and I'm not going to invent a motive for him. These days, he's back on the convention circuit, and he said he's working on a comic series called Redemption. About, well, exactly what you think it's about. Now, Zach, Walter Emanuel Jones, the man who invented hip-hop Kido, the man with more charisma in one episode than most casts manage in a season. Here's a fact you can test yourself. Go watch any episode of Mighty Morphin and look closely at Walter's left hand. Count his fingers. He's got 9. Walter lost his left middle finger in an accident when he was 4 years old, and the show simply never mentioned it. Years of kids' TV, and most fans watched for decades without ever noticing. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Walter was in that 1994 pay dispute too. Same deal. No contract, no residuals, tiny wages while the show made hundreds of millions. He walked out alongside Austin and Thuy, and he's been very open about it since. He loved Zach, but he couldn't accept being treated like he was replaceable. The industry didn't spit him out though. Walter went on to a properly long career in voice acting and on-screen work. He's one of the most beloved guests on the convention circuit. Genuinely warm with fans. Always up for the hip-hop Kido throwback. And in 2023, 30 years after he first morphed, Walter put the Black Ranger back on screen in the Netflix reunion special, Once and Always. One of only 2 original teens who did. More recently, Amy Jo Johnson's official Mighty Morphin comic put Zach right back into the story. New adventures for the character Walter created. This one's harder to tell. Thuy Trang came to America as a refugee. Her family fled Vietnam by boat when she was a small child. She nearly didn't survive the journey. She grew up in California, trained in martial arts, and in 1993, she became the Yellow Ranger, one of the first Asian American leads on American children's television. For a generation of kids, Trini was the first hero on TV who looked like them. She was also, by every single account from the people who worked with her, the kindest person on that set. Thuy stood with Austin and Walter in the pay dispute, and she paid the same price. Written out in 1994, replaced with recycled footage. After the show, she kept acting, landing film roles through the late 90s, and people who knew her said she was just getting started. On September the 3rd, 2001, Thuy was a passenger in a car traveling down Interstate 5 from San Francisco when it went off the road. She didn't survive. Her castmates have carried her with them ever since. When the reunion special was made 2 decades later, it was built almost entirely around Trini, around her daughter, and the team protecting her. The Yellow Ranger's chair was never filled. It was honored. Amy Jo Johnson was the one everybody had a crush on. She's also, honestly, the one with maybe the most interesting life after the show. She was a competitive gymnast before Hollywood. That's why Kimberly's flips were real. She stayed with the show longer than most of the original 6, right through the 1995 movie, before leaving during the Turbo era. And unlike a lot of child TV stars, she never got stuck. She went on to Felicity, then Flashpoint. Then she did the thing almost nobody from 90s kids TV managed. She moved behind the camera. Amy Jo is a proper film director now. She's based in Canada, she's directed feature films, she writes and performs her own music, with new music out as recently as 2024. And she co-wrote an official Mighty Morphin comic, The Return, for Boone Studios. Here's the bit that tells you everything about her though. When Netflix put together the 30th anniversary reunion, Amy Jo said no. And when the internet started speculating it was about money, she shut it down herself, publicly. She said, and I'm quoting her here, "Maybe I just didn't want to wear spandex in my 50s. She left on her own terms. Kimberly would be proud of that answer. She's never turned her back on the fandom, mind. She still does the conventions, still talks about the show with real affection. She just refuses to be frozen in 1993. David Yost holds a record that should have been a happy one. He was the longest-serving original Ranger, the only one of the 6 who stayed from the very first episode all the way into Zeo. Nearly 200 episodes. Billy was the heart of that team. And then one day in 1996, David walked off set during a lunch break and never came back. For 14 years, nobody outside the production really knew why. Fans invented theories, the show wrote Billy off to another planet, and David said nothing. Then in 2010, he finally told the truth. David is gay. And he says that during his years on the show, he was harassed relentlessly for it. Not by his castmates, by people on the crew and production staff. Called slurs on his own set. He said he eventually reached a point where he simply couldn't take it anymore. That's why he walked. What followed was even darker. He's spoken openly about going through so-called conversion therapy afterwards, and about a breakdown that hospitalized him before he finally accepted himself. The reason his story matters so much now is what happened next. David rebuilt. He talks to fans at conventions, some of whom tell him Billy was the reason they survived their own worst years. And in 2023, David Yost put the blue suit back on for once and always. Standing next to Walter Jones, the 2 remaining original teens still willing and able to morph. The man who was driven off that set walked back onto it on his own terms. Of every ending in this video, that one might be the best. You knew this was coming. We can't do this video without Tommy. Jason David Frank wasn't even one of the original 5. He was brought in for a 5-episode arc as the evil Green Ranger, a villain with an expiry date. The fan response was so overwhelming that Saban tore up the plan. Tommy became the White Ranger, then the leader, then the single most recurring hero in the history of the franchise. Green, white, red, black. He wore more colors than anyone, across more seasons than anyone, and the man matched the myth in real life. JDF was a legitimate martial artist. He built his own karate school system. He even stepped into a professional MMA cage and won. He was the face of every anniversary, every reunion, every convention hall. For 30 years, if you thought Power Ranger, you pictured him. On November the 19th, 2022, we lost Jason David Frank. He was 49. He'd been fighting a private battle with his mental health that almost none of us knew about, and he lost it. The fandom broke that day. Amy Jo Johnson wrote that she lost her first TV crush and lifelong friend. Tributes came from every era of the show because there wasn't a single cast across 30 seasons that he hadn't shown up for. If any part of his story feels close to home for you, please talk to someone. It's the most Tommy thing you could possibly do. Asking for backup isn't weakness. It's literally how the Rangers won every single week. So that's all 6. A paramedic who fell hard and is trying to climb back. A 9-fingered legend still repping hip-hop Kido. A trailblazer, taken at 27. A director who refused to be frozen in time. A survivor who walked away and then walked back. And the greatest Ranger of all, who we lost far too soon. 6 kids on minimum wage carried a billion-dollar franchise on their backs. Not one of their real stories was ever as simple as the show made it look. Now, the peace conference. Jason, Zach, and Trini getting written out with recycled footage and fake voices. There's a whole story about how the show covered up that walkout, and it's shadier than you think. That video's on your screen right now.